Well, hello. I'm Chief Rich Skinner of the Washington Township Police Department, and today I'd like to read you one of my favorite childhood books, Curious George. Curious George was always my favorite because he's a curious little monkey. This book is written by H.A. Rey. This is George. He lived in Africa. He was a good little monkey, but always very curious. One day, George saw a man. He had a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home. He put his hat on the ground, and of course, George was curious. He came down from the tree to look at the large yellow hat. That hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to put it on his own head. He picked it up and put it on. The hat covered George's head. He couldn't see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. George was caught. The man with the yellow hat put George in a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the ocean to a big ship. George was sad, but he was still curious. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took the bag off, sat George on a little stool, and said, "George, I'm going to take you to a big zoo in a big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble." George promised to be good, but sometimes it's easy for monkeys to forget. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was curious, but had to try. It looked easy. Oh, what happened? First this, and then this. Obviously, George could not fly. Where is George? The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water. Man overboard, the sailors cried as they threw him a lifebelt. George caught it and held on. At last, he was safe and back on board. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey. And at last, the long trip was over. He could say goodbye to his kind sailor friends, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship and into the city to a man's house. There's George leaving the ship. After a good meal, George felt very tired. He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. The man went away. George was curious, and he wanted to talk on the telephone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. George is dialing the phone. Ding-a-ling, George had telephoned the fire station. The firemen rushed to the phone. Hello, hello, but there was no answer. They looked for a signal on the big map, and they found out where George was calling from. They thought it might be a real fire. Hurry, 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 the firemen jumped on the fire engines and the hook and ladders. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Everybody ran out. Hurry, hurry, hurry. So the firemen are on their way to George's house. The firemen rushed into the house. They opened the door. Only a naughty little monkey they saw. No fire. Catch him, they cried. George tried to run away, and he almost did, but he got caught up in the telephone wire, and as you can see there, George got caught in the wire, and then all the firemen tripped over the desk. A thin fireman caught one arm. A big fireman caught the other. You fooled the fire department, they said. We will have to shut you in so you can't do any more harm. They took him away and put him in a prison. Uh-oh. Now George is really in trouble. George wanted to get out. He climbed up the window and tried to pry the bars. Just at that time, the watchman came in. He got a wooden bed for George, but the bed was too heavy. It tipped over, the watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. So George just got out of the jail. He hurried along the building and onto the roof. He was a lucky monkey. He walked on the telephone wires. Quietly, he walked right over the guard's head. He walked away and he was free. There was George escaping. Down the street, outside the prison wall, stood a man with balloons. A little girl and her brother watched. George watched. He was curious. He must have that bright red balloon. He reached over himself, but instead of one balloon, the whole bunch of balloons broke loose. In an instant, the wind whisked them away with George holding on tight. Up, 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 he sailed higher and higher. The houses looked like toys, and the people looked like dolls. George was very frightened. The wind blew, and George went flying. When it finally stopped blowing altogether, George was very tired. He went down, bump, on top of a traffic light. The traffic light got all mixed up, and then they heard someone call George. Look down. He looked down and saw the man with the big yellow hat. George was very happy. The man was too. George slid down the post, and the man with the yellow hat put his arm around him. He paid the balloon man for all the balloons, and then George and the man climbed out of the car. At last, they went. So good thing George had the man with the yellow hat to help him out of his problems, right? Can you guess where they went next? To the zoo. At the zoo, George loved it. What a nice place to live. So that is the end of the book, and this curious little monkey is back at the zoo, and he's very happy. Thank you for listening, and it was my pleasure to read to you today. Have a great day.